come down.
Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress, which kicks Hello and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. Today's show is really special because it features two segments with different guests who will be at the first ever Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress, which kicks off this Friday in Vienna. There's a link to it in the YouTube description. I'll be speaking there, and we're also going to be filming there because a few of the characters we're following around for our documentary about Holocaust survivors and their descendants speaking out against the genocide in Gaza will be there. Ilan Pappé, the great historian, will also be there. And hopefully, if she's released by Israel, Rima Hassan, the French politician who was kidnapped by Israel while she was on the Madeleine, the boat that Greta Thunberg was on, also on its way to Gaza. So if you're in the Vienna area, get tickets and come to Congress. And you can find the link again in the YouTube description. So first, I'm playing part 2 of the interview I did with 3 of the organizers of this Congress. And they talk about the one-state solution, which they are working towards with Palestinians. Then I'm playing an interview I did with the amazing historian Tony Greenstein, who wrote the incredible book, Zionism During the Holocaust, The Weaponization of Memory in the Service of State. And Tony talks about the sordid collaboration between Nazis and Zionists. But before we start, please like the show by giving it a thumbs up. That helps the algorithm, helps us reach more people, and please subscribe. And we're so grateful for your help helping us reach over 300,000 subscribers. Please become Patreon supporters, Patreon subscribers, so we can keep the show going. We literally couldn't do the show without your support. If you join at the $5 a month level, you get access to extended interviews, bonus interviews, early releases, and more. This week's Patreon is the extended interview with Tony Greenstein. And now for my Patreons who've seen this content before, don't worry, you will be getting new Patreon content next week, so sit tight. We really appreciate your patience while we're in Vienna. So as promised, here is part 1 of tonight's show, which is part 2 of my interview with Dalia, Sarig, Haim, Bresheeth, and Ronnie Barkin. Dalia Sarig is co-founder of the initiative Not in Our Name, founded by Jews in Vienna, and candidate on the Gaza list. Haim Bresheeth Zabner is a professor, filmmaker, and historian. His films include State of Danger, a documentary on the first Palestinian Intifada. His books include An Army Like No Other, How the Israel Defense Force Made a Nation. Haim is the son of 2 Holocaust survivors and was raised in Israel, and he's a member of the Holocaust Survivors and Descendants Against Genocide and a founding member of Jewish Network for Palestine. On November 4th, Haim was arrested over a speech he gave at a pro-Palestine demonstration outside the residence of Israeli Tzipi Hotovely in North London. Ronnie Barkin is an Israeli activist, a conscientious objector, and co-founder of Boycott from Within, a group of conscientious Israelis who support the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, against Israel. He represented the Popular Struggle Coordination Committees at the European Parliament in Brussels, where he challenged EU institutional complicity in Israeli violations. Speaking of which, what are the things that you guys are working on towards Palestinian liberation, towards a one-state solution?
So basically, we have a packed program for the entire conference, and it was mentioned that there are 2 days of panels, and the third day will have actually a lot of discussion, also a lot of audience input into the discussion. And this is important in order to not only have a sort of an academic discourse, but also not only discuss the past, but actually to learn from the past in order to think about the concrete measures that need to be implemented, practical measures, in order to struggle and eventually abolish Zionism. So this is kind of an initiative to jumpstart a movement that is basically, it exists, but it needs it needs the fuel to move, to take the next step. Within that, there are many types of discussions. In the practical aspect of it itself, there are aspects of, what measures are to be taken? BDS, sanctions, part of that, direct action, which I mentioned before that I am a participant of, etc. And there are also other issues to discuss. For example, discussing the day after. How do we see, let's say that we are successful in that. We have managed to, to fight that beast. We still have to build something for the future. So in the short term, we have to end the crime. in the long term, we actually have to live together. We want to live together as equals. And we have to build a whole thing around that. That is a lot of work in itself. So all of these will be incorporated. And I think the Times panel about learning from the past, about convivencia and how people used to live together in the past, and trying to learn how to implement that also into the future should be enlightening.
It's also very positive that not just the three of us, but all the organizers, all the Austrian organizers, including Dalia, are all of the same political view about the future. We are all in agreement that there is no two-state solution, because any solution that keeps Zionism alive is not worth talking about. Israel made that solution impossible, but even if it didn't, we wouldn't support it. It doesn't exist, of course. It's just, we call it the two-state delusion. It's not a solution. And we support, as Ronnie just said, a one democratic state in the whole of Palestine for all its people, including the 7.5 million refugees. So this is not something that is shared widely, either by politicians or by the public. And we want to use the Congress to spread the message that the only way to end not just the genocide, but Zionism itself. A genocide is not the disease. The genocide is just a side effect of the disease, the toxic movement of Zionism. So we are thinking not just about the past, but we are using the past to think about the future. And that's why it's important that Jews are actually spreading the Palestinian solution. This is a solution worked out by Palestinians in 1947, and then later by the PLO, and then later by the one-state movement campaign. So we, like Jews in South Africa, join the Palestinian movement to liberate Palestine, to decolonize Palestine, and to live together in peace and equality. And this will not happen without very severe sanctions. For example, why is Israel still in the UN? South Africa was kicked out of the UN in 1974 for misdemeanor called apartheid. They didn't conduct starvation campaign. They didn't conduct genocide. They didn't use 2,000 bombs on schools and hospitals. They didn't do any of that. And yet, because apartheid was illegal, they were actually chucked out of the UN and only joined in the 90s when Mandela was president. So we're saying, if this happened in 1974, why is Israel still in the UN? After it negated every single UN resolution since its inception. Why is it still an associate member of Europe? Why is it in any international organization, be it sport or science or industry or medicine? It should not be welcome anywhere on this planet. There is no space for genociders. They are not needed and not welcome. So we're not saying that the Jews now living in Palestine will be chucked out. The Palestinians are actually the most generous of all people that I know. They offer Jews in Palestine to live with them in peace, equality, and justice. Who else would have suggested this? It's very difficult in the times of genocide, but we must try and work this out, or there will be yet another genocide, and from one side, from the other side. We can't afford that. We want to live together in peace and in harmony, like Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived in Palestine for 2,000 years.
And that is basically the most radical notion. I usually say that, I mean, equality is the most radical notion. If I said that I support the resistance, for example, I will only be regarded as a traitor. But if I say that I support full equality in Palestine, that is beyond the scope of thinking of any Zionist whatsoever. And the whole idea of the one state demands full equality, multiculturalism, protection of minorities, and so on. And it is the only discourse that doesn't play the game of demographics. How many of us versus how many of them? So we know about the vile two-state solution, which is no solution at all, which is actually a way to perpetuate and legitimize the illegitimate, the legitimize apartheid. And now we hear other people, or the same people actually, trying to rehabilitate Zionism in other ways, for example, promoting a binational state, which is the exact same issue, the same problem, and they still play the game of demographics. Rather than demography, we want democracy, full rights for everyone. All 21 million, let's call them sons and daughters of the land, all 21 million stakeholders, the 40 million Palestinians, more than half of which are in forced exile, and those among us who are currently the privileged group and will have to renounce our privilege and live as equals in this shared space.
And this is why we have so much to learn from South Africa. Because amazing group of Jews joined the ANC and were crucial for its success and its victory. But also because the South African solution is incomplete. It's not justice that won, and not even equality that won. And they are the first to say this. So what we want is to learn from South Africa's successes and failures, and to suggest a solution which from the beginning, as Ronnie pointed out, is based on equality and justice. Not just about peace, but the three: peace, equality, and justice.
Can you talk about what is happening right now as we speak in Palestine? I mean, we're seeing people burned alive. We are seeing, obviously, all the usual suspects being bombed and targeted. So that would be hospitals, schools, obviously children and women suffering disproportionately. Yeah, what are your thoughts on what is happening right now?
I mean, I don't have words. I don't have thoughts. I only have tears. I mean, this is also why I'm active, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to bear it. It's always on my mind, and I'm sometimes a lot of crying, but sometimes also mad, and I'm in a fighting back modus. But because I think, that this is the only thing we can do now, and to raise our voices and to be loud, and to try to make our governments stand behind the decolonization of Palestine and not behind Israel, and especially in Austria and in Germany, where the governments completely agree to everything and support and are complicit and to everything Israel does. It's important to fight back.
It's very difficult to speak about this genocide, because we are out of words. And the reason that we are out of words is it's been going on for almost 2 years with no action from the Western so-called democracies. And the only action they took until now and continue to take is support the genocide. Militarily, financially, diplomatically, politically, socially, culturally, they support the destruction of international law. They support the destruction of humanity. Yeah, this is a test that humanity has failed. And this is the one test that humanity cannot fail if it wants to survive. So this is the first thing. The second thing is, even if you want to compare it to other genocide, let's take the worst genocide that we can think of, like the Jewish genocide by the Nazis, well, a lot of those things were not done by the Nazis. They didn't do song and dance about people that they killed, not just because the technology did not exist. They tried to hide the genocide, and these people are proud. They're proud. They're sending their wife a birthday message by destroying a hospital or a university or a whole block of flats with people in it. Just, as a historian, I know that throughout the Second World War, the hospital, the Jewish hospital in Berlin, continued to operate for 6 years through the war for the 3,000 Jews that remained in Berlin. Nobody bombed the hospital. Nobody took the doctors and raped them as some kind of measure of punishment. For what? For being a doctor? What people are now doing, no Nazi or other genocide actually went to the public and said, what we're doing is right, support us.
Right.
The population, the other populations in the other genocide were not part of it. And in some cases, arguably, they say that they didn't know it, like the Germans. Of course, it's a difficult argument. But here, the whole nation is, in a sense, voting democratically for genocide. This has not happened before. So all these things are making it really difficult to talk about it in comparative terms because you can't compare it.
Right.
Where was there a genocide that was, using 2,000-pound bombs on schools and hospitals? The bombs existed before, but nobody thought of doing that. So we now, where was there a genocide that intellectuals, writers, doctors, poets, nurses, and of course journalists were decimated at a rate that, in all the other conflicts in the last 80 years, less journalists were killed than in Gaza. This is incredible. I mean, you're a journalist. You know what we're talking about. If you talk about the genocide, you're killed. A woman that was part of a film by an Iranian director was killed when it became clear that the film is going to be in the French festival. They killed her a few days before the film came out with her family. For God's sake, what is Jewish about it? What is human about it? What is legal about it? What is moral? So we're actually having a problem finding the words and finding, because it has never happened like it does now. And the whole nation of Israel is supporting it. Between 82 and 91%, depending on which poll you go for, are supporting it. So this is democratic. This is totally democratic.
Right. I think a lot of people like to say, oh, Netanyahu doesn't represent most Israelis. We have to separate the government from the people, which I think in general is a valid thing to when you're looking at countries versus their governments, people versus their governments. But in this case, there really isn't that split.
No, there isn't a split between, I think that Netanyahu is very representative of Israeli society, but also those who oppose Netanyahu. They are no less of a problem. Actually, they are a greater problem, and they are actually even more racist and more supremacist. And the numbers that Haim mentioned, also in the previous massacres in Gaza, in 2008, Cast Lead, 2014, Protective Edge, 95% of Israelis, and when we say Israelis, we never count the second-class citizens, we never count the Palestinians who are citizens of the state, because it is an exclusive society by design. 95% of them supported the massacre that was ongoing. Only 3 or 4% thought that Israel was using excessive force when they leveled the entire Shijai neighborhood. So, and the same numbers also exist today. So there is a poll taking place where people are now. There was just a recent poll published, and you have the vast majority supporting a genocide, the vast majority supporting ethnic cleansing, the vast majority even supporting starvation policy. And that is what we're fighting against. So yes, everything that was mentioned, Israel is quite literally looking at it as finishing the job that they haven't finished in 1948, because there are some Palestinians still left in Palestine, and that is a problem for them, Zionists, all of them with no exception. At the same time, we also see the complete and utter failure of humanity. Optimistic me would like to see that there is also a countermeasure to that, a kind of a balancing act to that, which is, as the fascists are joining forces, also the anti-fascists should be joining forces. We're seeing the people of the world demonstrating, taking action, taking very inspirational actions, but it is still not good enough. So we really have to step up that part.
And let's not forget, we live in the West, all four of us, and the West is financing, is supporting, is enabling, is justifying this. The West, in its moral and other forms of decline, is not just unable to stop the genocide, but it does all it can to further it and assist it. That's what the first Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress is going to point out, to criticize, to attack, and hopefully to remove from our society. We as Jews have a duty, but also have, a position in history that requires us to remove this toxic policy from our societies, because our societies are not free because Palestine is not free. This was already said by Mandela and Archbishop Tutu many years ago. No one will be free until Palestine is free. We can now appreciate their wisdom more than ever before.
Let's not forget the argument, the fake argument of criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic, which in Austria and Germany it's dominant. And with this Congress, we can make the point that it's ridiculous to accuse us all of being anti-Semitic Jews. Even that's they do it, but it's obvious that this is just ridiculous. So we can at least also make this point. And I think everything that's happening in Gaza and the West Bank in Palestine now urged us to do this as quick as possible and as monumental as possible. And to do it in Vienna is especially important because here this madness started here, and we still have the Herzl stairs, we still have Herzl Place here, we still have politicians that go there and commemorate Herzl and everything. So yes, it's important to do it here in Austria, and I really hope that it will continue to live, and it will continue to take place also in other places. And yeah.
Great. Yeah, and of course, just want to add that the idea that criticizing Israel as anti-Semitic is, of course, anti-Semitic in itself, because it is based on the premise that all Jews are a monolith who support Israel. It perpetuates that dual loyalty trope, which Zionists are constantly accusing others of engaging in, and when they accuse others of engaging in that, they're being totally disingenuous. And it also creates anti-Semitism, because what will create more anti-Semitism than the idea that all Jews support a genocide that's being live streamed as we speak? So,
I really have to mention that the building where the representatives of the Jewish community in Vienna are sitting, they have the Israeli. There's the synagogue and also the bureaus there and the offices. They have an Israeli flag over there. It's complete conflation, and who wonders that this taking this apart is difficult for people,
Right. Right.
And it's purposeful.
While they attack us as anti-Semitic, they are in bed with the worst anti-Semites on earth. Every anti-Semitic leader is working with Israel, and that's their human shield for their fascism, for their racism. The EU is one of the most criminal regime, a combination of regimes, all of them who are vying with each other to support Israel more than the rest. I think this has to end.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. And really looking forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Great.
See you soon.
Yes.
Thanks for your help.
Of course. And just a reminder, you can see me, Dalia, Haim, Ronnie, and also historian Ilan Pape, the great Ramazan, the Egyptian journalist who confronted CNN's Clarissa Ward, and if she's released by Israel, Rima Hassan, the French-Palestinian member of parliament who was kidnapped on the Medellin boat trying to reach Gaza. Just a reminder, please like the show by giving a thumbs up, and please subscribe. That helps us reach more people. And thank you so much to getting us over 300,000 subscribers. Once again, reminding you to please become Patreon supporters so we can keep the show going, which we could not do without your Patreon support. And if you join at the $5 a month level, you get access to extended interviews, bonus interviews, early releases, and more. And this week's Patreon is the extended interview with Tony Greenstein, which you are about to watch part of. So now, without further ado, my interview with Tony Greenstein, the co-founder of Britain's Palestine Solidarity Campaign and the author of Zionism During the Holocaust, the Weaponization of Memory in the Service of State and Nation. He will also be speaking, by the way, at the first Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress, along with little old me. Can you also talk about one of the people that you dedicate your book to is Marek Edelman. Can you talk about that figure?
Yeah, well, he was the leader of the Bund in the Warsaw Ghetto resistance, although the first commander was a Zionist, Mordechai Anielewicz, because he had military experience. The Bund comprised the major fighting parts of the resistance.
And can you give a sentence explanation for people who don't know what the Bund was?
Yes, of course. The Bund was the General Jewish Workers' Union of Russia, Lithuania, and Poland. And of course, with the Russian Revolution, the Bund no longer existed in Russia. Most of them joined the Bolshevik Party in Poland, which was more to the right, and wasn't, it's split, in fact, between supporters and opponents of the Bolsheviks. They were a mass party of the Jewish working class. And although at first they were small in the 1920s, and the Zionists were much stronger because they were separatists and they accorded with the minority treaties that had been agreed at the end of the First World War. As the 30s in particular developed and anti-Semitism developed, the Zionist answer was really no answer because they couldn't emigrate to Palestine. And so either they fought anti-Semitism or they accepted it. The Zionists didn't fight it. In fact, Pole Zion split in 1919 into a right and a left. And the left Pole Zion, in essence, were really not Zionists. They left or refused to join the World Zionist Organization and operated with the Bund. Their most famous member was Emanuel Ringelblum, who was the recorder of the Warsaw Ghetto, and he buried his writings and notes in the ground. And I think 2 out of 3 capsules have been found, but one has yet to be found. But yeah, I mean, the Zionists parties were acquiescent and they ran the Judenrat. The youth, however, didn't want this, and the young Zionists allied with the Bund, Hashem Hatzer, and so on. And they fought together. And Edelman says, I mean, he was the last commander of the Warsaw Ghetto resistance. I mean, he said there were no political differences because, in essence, Zionism was irrelevant. I mean, They fought not because they were Zionists, but despite the fact that they were Zionists. The political parties they came from did not approve of resistance. So they were in a rebellion against them, and they were in rebellion against their Palestinian parties, who also said they shouldn't be fighting. This was a waste of talent, which could be better spent in Palestine. So Edelman led the last fighting squads of the resistance in the Bushmakers area he was, and he managed to escape through the tunnels into the Aryan part of Warsaw, as it was, and survived. And when he came sometimes to Israel to see his old comrades, and he made it clear in a famous letter he issued to the Palestinian resistance, although he said they should turn away from terrorism, which he saw as suicide bombing, etc. He addressed them as fellow partisans, and that caused an absolute uproar in Israel. And when he died in 2008, he had a state funeral. The Polish president gave the oration. It was a 15-gun salute, and not even the lowliest clerk from the Israeli embassy attended, because for them, Marek Edelman was dead. The whole history of the Warsaw Ghetto resistance, of course, ends up in a Hollywood movie, but it's a complete distortion of history. It was led by Anti-Zionist and communists.
Right. And they had a very interesting philosophy of here-ness, right? The Bunds, which was all about fighting and belonging and living here, as opposed to over there.
That's right. I mean, the whole basis of their ideology was that Jews belonged where they were. They didn't belong in some other country, certainly not in Palestine. You fight where you are, which is, of course, a socialist and Marxist position, that you don't run away, except in extremists. So, yes, they fought. And even when in 1940 Polish anti-Semites with Nazi encouragement attacked, they formed self-defense squads to see them off. So they always believed in unity with the non-Jews. I mean, you can criticize some of their tactics. I mean, they were a social democratic rather than a Marxist party, of course.
We'll forgive them.
Yes, exactly. They were a mass-based party, and they had the loyalty not only of the Jewish working class, but actually the majority of the Orthodox would have voted for them in Warsaw, because no one really saw the Zionists as a credible solution. So in the last 3 elections in 1938, out of the 20 Jewish council seats, the Zionists won 1 and the Bund won 17. And the same was true in Lodz, which was the second major city in Poland. So Zionism was simply irrelevant. I mean, it didn't relate to the circumstances Jews faced on a day-to-day basis.
I don't remember if this is in your book, so forgive me if it is, but I remember coming across this song that was a Bunda song, right? And it was said, "Oh, you foolish little Zionists with your utopian mentality, you better go down to the factory and learn the workers' reality." I mean, I'm sure they're not translating it accurately because they're making it rhyme, but this is the gist of it.
Sure.
You want to take us to Jerusalem so we can die as a nation. We'd rather stay in the diaspora and fight for our liberation.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sums it up. It's not in my book, but that sums up their ideology, that you fight where you are, and you also unite with non-Jews to fight, whereas the Zionist idea of separating yourself off from the non-Jews was an utter and total disaster, because that's exactly what the anti-Semites wanted, was to separate off. And of course, when it came to the resistance, the Zionists couldn't obtain any arms because they didn't have any contact. It was the Bund who obtained it from the Polish Home Army. The other Zionist group which did have contact and which did fight separately was the revisionist ZZW, because their friends were Polish fascists with whom they'd allied, and so they actually did get quite large quantities of arms. So they did fight, but again, I mean, they weren't fighting as Zionists; they were fighting as people who were Jewish facing extermination. And when you face extermination, you will fight regardless of your ideology.
Can you talk about the way Zionism incorporated anti-Semitism, or perhaps, I mean, we get accused of being self-loathing, but I feel like there was actually a lot of self-loathing among Zionists. Not to overly psychologize this, but obviously things like this intersect with structural phenomena. But can you talk about that and also talk about the treatment of Holocaust survivors by Israel?
Yes, I mean, the Zionist ideology was their view of the situation. And in fact, their whole project was based on the winding up of the diaspora, the galut, the exile. Jabotinsky, in a famous saying, said, either you destroy the galut or the galut will destroy you. And they came to see that anti-Semitism really was quite right. The Jews had developed antisocial qualities because they were guests in someone else's country and they'd outstayed their welcome. They'd become parasites, moneylenders, etc., and were naturally resented. And Jacob Klatskin, who was one of the Zionist theoreticians, he edited their paper from 1909 to 1911, said, if we do not admit the rightfulness of anti-Semitism, we deny the rightfulness of our own nationalism. Instead of establishing societies for defense against the anti-Semites who want to reduce our rights, we should establish societies for defense against our friends who desire to defend our rights. So that was a Zionist attitude. And Klatskin went on, because, I mean, to say that the Jews in exile, Galut, were a people disfigured in both body and soul. In a word of a horror, at the very most, it can maintain us in a state of national impurity and breed some sort of outlandish creature. The result will be something neither Jew nor Gentile. In any case, not a pure national type, some sort of oddity amongst the people going by the name Jew. And that wasn't just confined, I might add, to the right wing, if you like, of the Zionist movement. I mean, Hashem Hatzer, for instance, if I can find it, said that the diaspora Jew was a caricature of a human being. And there were many, many similar quotes along the same lines. And Joachim Doran, it's in an essay in the Journal of Israeli Studies. He's an Israeli political scientist, and he said about this that rather than taking up arms against the enemies of the Jews, Zionism attacked, quote, the enemy within, the diaspora Jew himself, and subjected him to a hail of criticism. Indeed, a perusal of the Zionist sources reveals a wealth of charges against the diaspora Jew, and I've emphasized this in my book, some of which are so scathing that the generation that witnessed Auschwitz has difficulty comprehending them. And that was, if you like, the reality. They came to the same conclusions about Jews that the anti-Semites did. And Arthur Rupin, when accused of anti-Semitism, said, yes, I am. So what? Rupin was the second most important Zionist figure in pre-state Palestine, so he wasn't just an oddity. So that was a Zionist attitude to anti-Semitism. They basically had no objection. They could understand the anti-Semites' view that the Jews did not belong, that they were out of sync with society. And Chaim Weizmann spends some time exonerating William Evans Gordon, who was the founder of the British Brothers League, and said Jews should not be hard on him. All he was doing was simply thinking about the English. He didn't really have any prejudices against Jews, apart from the fact he didn't want them there. So, I mean, he was an ardent Zionist, William Evans Gordon, as were most anti-Semites. So this was the attitude of Zionism towards anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism grows and so do I, said Theodor Herzl. I mean, you can look back to the remarkable thing about Theodor Herzl, who was the founder of political Zionism, is he existed. He was a journalist from Vienna who was based in Paris. He was a correspondent for the New Free Press, which was a Viennese journal owned by Jews who weren't Zionists, and he wasn't allowed to say anything about Zionism in it. And he was operating in the climate of Dreyfus. And this was the major battle against anti-Semitism that took part in the last decade of the 19th century. And it was a victory for those who opposed anti-Semitism. And yet the Zionists drew all the wrong conclusions. I mean, Herzl wrote in his diaries, probably about 1895, but so the campaign hadn't taken off. But he said, in Paris, I achieved a freer attitude towards anti-Semitism, which I now began to understand historically and to pardon. Above all, I recognize the emptiness and futility of trying to combat, inverted commas, anti-Semitism. So that was their attitude. I mean, Leon Pinsker, who was the founder of the first Zionist organization, the Lovers of Zion, in 1882, wrote that anti-Semitism is, or he called it Judeophobia because he was a doctor. He said it's a mental disease, and as such, it's hereditary. And having been inherited for 2,000 years, it's incurable. Because the belief then was if you were mentally ill, it must have been inherited from your parents and so on. I mean, that was the basis of eugenics, of course, that these things were hereditary and you could selectively breed them out. So, I mean, that was a Zionist belief. And in fact, I mean, most of the early Zionists were believers in eugenics. People like Max Norder, who was Herzl's deputy, Arthur Rupin, who was a great believer in the racial sciences, wrote whole books on it. So this was where Zionism came from. It came from the same poison stream that Nazis did.
And so what is your response to the claim that Israel was founded as a refuge from the Holocaust and that Israel, treated survivors very well?
Well, if it was founded as a refuge from the Holocaust, it came too late. And it didn't fulfill their task. It was a failure on that account alone. But when you think of during the Holocaust, the Zionist movement strained every muscle to oppose rescue to any destination bar Palestine, on the grounds that if they were rescued somewhere else, it would only create anti-Semitism and the whole thing would occur again. That was their rationale. But in reality, it was because if you couldn't save them via a Jewish state, then what was the point of a Jewish state? So the Jewish state took priority over everything else. And they were quite open about that. They didn't want any distractions. And so the Biltmore Conference of May 1942, its main demand was for a Jewish state, a Jewish Commonwealth, as they called it. There was nothing about rescue. The Zionists weren't interested in rescue. It's not only that, but they resented others being concerned, because if they were, it took energy and funds away from the Zionist project. Zionist was its main priority throughout was building a Jewish state. And the more honest of the Zionist historians, like Robert Wistrich, who's a professor at Tel Aviv, he was commenting on Perdition, the play in Britain that Zionists tried to ban. And he said, well, this is very silly because we all know that Zionism was its main priority was building a Jewish state. And even Eli Wiesel commented very unfavorably when he reviewed Tom Segev's The Seventh Million about the Zionist record. They saved very few people and were just interested in building the Jewish state. Settling a few Dunhams was more important than saving a few Jews. I mean, that was the reality. So during the Holocaust, it was a total and utter disaster. But of course, afterwards, they used the Holocaust as the excuse for their state. I mean, they plundered the memory of those who died in order to perpetrate much the same as is now going on in Gaza. So they're justifying genocide on the basis of genocide against the Jews. I mean, that is how outrageous and disgusting Zionism is. It has no self-respect. It tramples on the memory and desecrates the memory of those who died, because they didn't die in order to justify what the Nazis did to them, obviously. So, I mean, Zionism is a shameless movement by any account.
And what about the treatment of survivors within Israel?
Well, that follows, you see, because the survivors were seen as the kind of perpetuators of the diaspora Jew, and the diaspora Jew is really a hated figure for Zionists. But it was very, very useful, the Holocaust, in terms of reparations from Germany. I mean, Germany had an interest in supporting Israel because that was its ticket to becoming part of the Western Alliance. And so they formed this very close military and financial relationship. It was an alliance of the two devils, in a sense. Germany got into NATO, got acceptance politically at a time when there was massive resentment against them. I mean, Morgenthau, the US Treasury Secretary, proposed that Germany be turned into an agricultural country, stripped of its industrial assets, and Roosevelt agreed with that. So it was a pretty strong current in the American ruling class, and also amongst the Europeans. That's what led to the formation of the European Union, or what was then the European Coal and Steel Community. That Germany could not be trusted not to industrialize, grow again, and then try to take over everyone else. So Israel formed an alliance, in a sense, with Germany, that it would get reparations, but they weren't reparations which went to the individual Holocaust survivors. They went to build Israel's military machine and its Zionist projects and its education and so on. And over a third of Holocaust survivors are living in abject poverty, forced to choose between heating and eating. So the practice, of course, differs from the propaganda. So they commemorate the Holocaust 3 times a year, but the Holocaust survivors don't play much part in it because it's not about the individual. Zionism has never been interested in the individual. The Holocaust is there because it can be instrumentalized, nothing more.
And didn't they? I mean, I've interviewed a few people like Jacques Bund in Brussels, who spent some time in Israel against his will, basically. I mean, he was sent by rich Belgian Zionists to Israel after his parents were killed in Auschwitz. He hated it and then escaped and has lived in Brussels ever since. He talked about how they would throw around the term sapon, which I guess means is Hebrew for soap.
Yeah,
which was a reference to the myth of Nazis turning Jewish fat into soap.
Yes, that's correct.
So they had like insults based on surviving, or based on, I guess, the Holocaust.
Yeah, I mean, they had contempt for the Holocaust survivors. They had gone, as Gideon Hausner said in the Auschwitz trial, he was a prosecutor, like sheep to the slaughter, which was absolute nonsense. I mean, what would you do if you confronted people with machine guns who herded you into a train? I mean, any more than the people in Gaza can somehow stand up against those with modern day weaponry when they have nothing. I mean, all civilian populations, when surrounded by men in boots and armor, have to give way. So, I mean, there was nothing inherently weak about the Jewish diaspora. On the contrary, the self-defense squads against anti-Semites had been set up by the Anti-Zionist Bund, not by the Zionists. But that was part of the Zionist myth of the new Jew. Once you established yourself on fresh soil, blood and bloden, as the Germans nationalists called it, then you'd been reinvigorated. In essence, Israel became a new settler colonial state and nation.
Can you talk about this idea of never again and what that means to you? Also, what happened to your family during the Holocaust?
Well, my mother's family was unaffected because they were longer standing, living in England. My father came over from Poland in 1912, so that part of his family, probably the majority, which didn't come over, died in Treblinka, I think, or in Germany, because 90% of Polish Jews died in the Holocaust. So, yes, of course, my family would have been affected as much as anyone else's.
And did your father talk about the family members who were wiped out in the Holocaust?
No, he never talked about those of his brothers and sisters who didn't survive or anything else, or his other relations. And that was common to Holocaust survivors. They didn't want to talk about what had happened. It was a closed chapter. It was the past, and they didn't really want to be reminded about it. But never again for me would be obviously never again for anyone. I mean, if you're going to say never again, then it applies to everyone. It can't just apply to Jews. Whereas in Israel, never again for the Zionists. Just applies to Jews. And so they see nothing wrong with erasing the Palestinians from the map. They openly talk about extermination. Finish them off as the most popular car bumper sticker in the country. Exterminate now is another sticker that gets branded around. And all the TikTok videos of Israeli soldiers blowing up buildings or people, or the tribute by one genocider to his dead fallen comrade who had killed 30 but had run over maybe hundreds with his tank tracks, was that he'd stopped running people over in his tanks because he had to scrape the hands and legs of people off his tank tracks. I mean, it's just appalling stuff. This is what has become of Israel. And it's no wonder they have the same settler colonial mentality they did, say, in America when they were exterminating Indians. I mean, the lesson and the moral of it is that any group of people, given the right set of circumstances, become racists, killers, murderers. There's nothing special about Jews. I mean, racism is not a biological inheritance. Anyone can become a racist, again, if you create the right kind of society. It's not peculiar to certain people, which is why people like Daniel Goldhagen, who wrote, if you remember, Hitler's Willing Executioners, when he talked about the German eliminationist mentality, was talking such rubbish. There's nothing peculiar to Germans. In fact, during the Holocaust, the worst practitioners were the Romanians, if anyone. The Romanian fascists were the most barbaric, and the Croatians. The Nazis were, I guess, relatively civilized, and they actually industrialized. I mean, but then is the death of people under tank tracks any better than dying in a gas chamber?
Right.
Or under the rubble, where you have a lingering death for days? Or you starve to death slowly? I mean, where's the difference?
Yeah, it's interesting. People really seem to, when they argue against comparing the Holocaust to what's happening in Gaza, they always focus on, understandably, because it's a useful tool for them, they focus on the final solution and the industrialized, attempted extermination of Jews, as if it was okay to just take them out and shoot them in the woods, or make them dig their own mass graves, shoot them and throw them in there, put them in ghettos, starve them.
Well, the reason they adopted the final solution in terms of gassing was precisely because of the effect on the SS men who were killing people face to face. They had so many people suffering what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. They had, according to the Nazis, a mental hospital for the SS in Eastern Europe. And it was SS General von den Belusky who cornered Himmler at a particular moment and said, you're creating psychological wrecks, psychopaths. You've got to stop this and find another way of doing it.
It's interesting, by the way, Renee Lichtman, I don't know if you've seen any of the interviews with him. He's fascinating. Another person we're following in this documentary. He's actually he was a hidden child in Paris, very involved in the Federation of Hidden Children. And he's been protesting outside the Holocaust Museum in Detroit, where he used to lecture, because they were refusing to talk about Gaza, even though you know they've talked about Rwanda in the past. They understand connecting it to other things. But he brought up the story about which I've heard you talk about too. Was it Himmler who said, you have to kill these people, these children, because if not, they're going to want to avenge us?
Yeah, that was That was a famous speech of Himmler to the SS generals on the 4th of October 1943. It was played, it was tape recorded, so it was played at the Nuremberg trials. Yeah, Himmler spoke about how everyone was horrified, every one of us was horrified Yet every one of us knew that we would do it again if it were ordered and if it were necessary. I'm referring to the extermination of the Jewish people, and this is on record. In a second speech at Poznan on the 6th of October 1943, Himmler explained why Jewish children had to be killed. Quote, I did not assume to have the right to exterminate the men and have the Avengers personified in the children to become adults for our children and grandchildren. And that is quoted in Raoul Hilberg's The Destruction of the European Jews. It's also in Walter Lecoeur's Holocaust Reader. And it was also on tape, so there's no doubt about what he said. What is particularly remarkable is an Israeli rabbi, Eliyahu Mali, a rabbi. He's chief of a pre-military yeshiva in Jaffa, and he was on record as saying that not in our midst of a holy war, in our situation in Gaza, according to what the law says, not every soul shall live. And the logic is very clear. He claimed that those described as vandals in today's war, or terrorists, are the children of the previous war whom we kept alive. In reality, it is the women who produced terrorists. This means that this rule, do not keep alive every soul, is very clear in its concept. Either you or them, he said. Whoever comes to kill you, kill him first. And he was questioned. Whoever comes to kill you in this concept does not include the young man aged 16, 18, 20 or 30 who is now pointing a weapon at you, but also the future generation, the children of Gaza, and those who produce the future generation, the women of Gaza, because there is really no difference. So this is exactly, if you like, the Hitler mentality. I can't actually see you now. I must have gone off. Oh, there it is. Yes. Sorry. I didn't realize it was web. But what Rabbi Eliyahu Mali is saying, it's a Moshe something. He's in, it's a Shirat Moshe religious school in Gaza. What he's saying, in essence, is exactly what Himmler was saying, that if you don't kill the children, they'll come to revenge the death of their parents. And Moshe is saying, well, if you allow the children to stay alive, they will come back as your avengers. It's exactly the same Nazi mentality is percolating through Israeli society. Because it's the same situation, except it's actually worse in a sense, because the majority of Germans were not racists or anti-Semites. Anti-Semitism was never respectable in Germany, which is why between 30 and 33 Hitler played it down. He campaigned on an anti-Bolshevik program, not an anti-Semitic program. There is really no doubt about that. Even Yehuda Bohr accepts that. When the Nazis came to power, they had a program and they put it into practice, of course. But it wasn't with the consent of the majority of the German people. And even, Kristallnacht was incredibly unpopular amongst the people, for example. If the attitudes of Israelis towards Palestinians had been reflected amongst non-Jews in Europe, it would not have been 6 million, it would have been 7 or 8 million.
Right. Another interesting difference between with the Nazis and with the Israeli, let's say another difference between Nazis and the IDF is that, there's all this talk of, Arendt's concept of the banality of evil. But in Israel, it's almost like a gleeful celebration of evil. It's not the kind of detached, mechanized behavior of Germans. It is actually it's gleeful.
Yeah, you are
and
right.
Not hidden.
Yes, you are right. They take positive enjoyment in their own cruelty. You could see that with the rapes in Sedate Haman, where they broadcast these things, they put them on TikTok and other social media. They're proud of it. whereas the Nazis hid it away. It was forbidden to write back home about what you'd done, and people were punished for that. Although, in fact, stories did get back and they were circulated. The Nazis actually took great care to hide it, but Israelis are actually taking no care. So, when you have these men parading around in women's underwear of Palestinian women, quite openly, they're photographing, videoing it, putting it on TikTok and Facebook and so on. They're not ashamed of it in the slightest. You see the TikTok videos of Israeli youth dressing up as Palestinians, smearing themselves, and just mocking them. Yes, it's pure evil. So in that sense, yes, the banality of evil was a desktop murderer, in a sense, how the mass murderer was really a bureaucrat who was writing out letters. In Israel, of course, it's artificial intelligence combined with a homicidal maniac mentality that does that. So yes, Hannah Arendt, I think, would be stumped to explain Israeli behavior today. Although she and Einstein did foresee where Jewish nationalism went, I don't think either of them could possibly foresee the extent to which it's taken place. But I also have to say that whatever Israel does, the United States and the imperialists will support it. Biden, there is nothing that will outrage them.
Right. I often think that as long as it's literally not gassing people, and who knows, but as long as there's one thing that they can distinguish from the Nazis, they'll be able to morally back it. And actually, that's brings me to the next question I was going to ask you. I mean, I know what your answer is going to be, but I want you to elaborate on it. There's a debate. Is it that the Israel lobby controls the United States and the West, or is it kind of the other way around? So why does the West support Israel so unwaveringly?
Oh, because I think it's quite simple. Israel has carved up with the Arab regimes the whole of the Middle East. It is dissected, it's fractionalized, it's confessionalized, and it's bolstered Arab reactionary regimes against more progressive regimes and forces and tendencies. In Syria, it's openly aiming to confessionalize the whole state, to divide it so much so that it's forever weakened and cannot challenge Israel again. I mean, I don't have much time for what Assad represented. It was a kind of vicious, ghastly regime, but it kept Egypt, Syria together and was a secular regime. But the nature of Baathism was it was highly undemocratic, and it was bound to fall because it was based on terror. And eventually that terror didn't work. And after 2011, it was clear that it couldn't establish a stable base. And that
the
really,
sanctions didn't help either. I'll get accused of being an Assadist, right? But obviously the sanctions and the dirty war also helped destabilize it.
Oh, of course, yes. I mean, imperialism wanted Assad gone. They were determined to get him sooner or later, and in the end, he went. But Cuba's been under sanctions for 50 odd years, and it survived because it has a popular base. But Assad never had that, and he relied, in essence, on his own minority, Alawites, and so on. Arabs have got to do a lot of thinking about how they have gone wrong in the last half century or more, why we have ended up from Nasserism to, the abject collaboration of Sisi, the Saudi king, and all the rest of it. Because Israel has done a remarkable job in one sense in dividing the Arabs completely. And it is responsible in large part for the perpetuation of the horrific regimes which dominate, whether it's in Jordan, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or the Gulf monarchies, the UAR and so on.
What does the West get out of Israel on a concrete level?
Well, it's display of force. It's the power to intimidate. It's the reflection of the confessionalism of the Israeli state, which is reproduced in Syria and elsewhere, in Lebanon and so on. I mean, the civil war, but for Syria's invasion, which was instigated in a sense by the US and Israel, the Lebanese national movement would have triumphed against the Phalange and so on. So revolutionary developments in the Arab East have been, at the behest of Israel and its protégés, squashed. I mean, Israel gave support to the Saudis when they were fighting in Yemen, not just recently, but way back when Nasser's forces were also involved in the conflict. I mean, it's had long-standing relationships with the Gulf regimes, today openly, but in the previous past secretly. We know they have with Jordan from the very beginning of the state. If you read Avi Schleim's collusion with across the Jordan. So, I mean, Israel has done the job it was set up to do in a sense. And the idea that Israel controls the United States, I think, is absolutely crazy. It doesn't control the United States. The United States could stop Israel if it wanted, very, very easily and very quickly. It chooses not to do so.
Right.
I mean, Biden, when he says...
We saw with Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, well, I mean, Reagan froze the arms shipments when Israel was bombing Lebanon and forced them into withdrawing in the end because the ties were not so great as they are now. I mean, each succeeding president has been more pro-Zionist than the last. That's the reality of American politics. Israel is almost the United States in the Middle East, except it has a certain independence. But the idea that Israel controls the United States is just getting the relationship the wrong way around. It's looking through a telescope from the wrong end. Biden said, and he was right, if Israel wasn't there, we would have had to invent it. And others have said much the same thing. Israel performs a useful task. So it's given money for a reason, not because Americans are guilt-tripped about the Holocaust or anything else.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, get that wrong. They say, oh, the West feels so guilty about it. I mean, if the West felt guilty, they would have opened up their doors to refugees.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
that's just it. That's the ideal. I mean, that's a nice cover, right? That we owe these people never again. We owe Jews protection, and we can't have another Holocaust. But of course, that never motivates. I mean, the West altruism. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. I mean, America and Britain support Israel not because of the Jews, because of their own interest. I mean, who was it? James Baldwin said that the West supports Israel not for the salvation of the Jews, but for the salvation of its own interests, and he was absolutely correct in that. I mean, Jews are the moral alibi for Israel,
right?
For imperialism, nothing more. Nothing more.
And get access to the rest of that interview with Tony Greenstein at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's